Parents across the country are awaiting final approval of a COVID-19 vaccine for kids. An FDA advisory panel approved a reduced dose Pfizer shot for children between ages 5 and 11. The FDA is expected to authorize the shot soon. The CDC will likely follow in the FDA's footsteps shortly after that. Now, so more on this, I want to bring in Max Bayer. He's a CBS News reporter covering COVID-19. Max, welcome. Great to see you. So the FDA's panel voted to recommend the shot for kids 3 days ago. Why has the FDA not given their final approval yet?
Well, after VRBPAC makes their recommendation, the agency takes additional time to continue to comb through the data and to review VRBPAC's comments. But because the agency isn't bound by the recommendation, they take it into account and make a final decision based off of the totality of evidence. Oftentimes, they do follow through with that recommendation. I think in this instance, folks are expecting that they do follow through. But they basically just take some additional time to look at the data, consider what the VRBPAC members had to say and the data that was presented to the committee, and then make a final decision.
So, as I mentioned earlier, there are many steps that need to happen before the final approval of the shot for children. Do we have any idea when all of this could happen? Because that date seems to keep moving a little bit. We heard maybe by the fall, maybe by Christmas. And my next question, which is kind of related to this, is cases of COVID are somewhat on the decline nationwide. I mean, depending obviously on the area of the country. Will the fact that that is happening and this is taking a while to get final approval will any of the steam behind parents' enthusiasm of getting their kids vaccinated sort of dissipate?
So for the first question, we absolutely have a tentative timeline for when these shots could be going into arms. So once the FDA announces their decision, the regulatory process will move to the FDA. Their outside advisors are currently slated to meet on Tuesday. They're going to be meeting Tuesday and Wednesday, but Tuesday, the draft agenda shows to be the day where they'll discuss the COVID vaccine. The advisors will likely make a recommendation on the vaccine at the end of Tuesday, and the CDC director will then make a decision on those recommendations. I think folks expect that she might sign off on that. And so that means that if the CDC director signs off later Tuesday, shots could be going into arms as soon as Wednesday. As it pertains to enthusiasm and folks' interest in the shot, I'm not exactly sure if the recent decline in cases would stymie enthusiasm. Cases amongst kids have been declining since a peak in September. And folks that I've spoken to in the past have mentioned that, I guess fear of COVID or fear of illness does operate as an incentive for vaccination. But I still think likely the people who have been interested in wanting to get their kids vaccinated likely still do, and people who have reservations probably do as well. Although I would say that people who had reservations before the VRBPAC meeting had the opportunity to look at, a bunch of new evidence, some of the top experts in the field discussing that data, considering that data, which should provide some clarity to folks who felt like they were unsure about what the data showed about this vaccine in this age group.
Right. And, Max, right now, about 58% of eligible Americans are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. That percentage, of course, varies state to state, with some states having as low as a 41% vaccination rate and others as high as 71%. Can we expect that same overall trend for children in this 5 to 11 age group? So, in other words, those states that tend to be more vaccinated are going to have more kids getting vaccinated and vice versa. Will that be likely to play out?
Early polling would suggest that it may be a bit of a slower rollout. So looking at some of the polling from the Kaiser Family Foundation from the beginning of the year, as vaccines became more available for the general population, around 55 to 65% of adults were reporting that they had either already gotten their shot or were going to do so the moment that it was available to them. The latest polling from Kaiser in regards to parents of kids 5 to 11, it was just released yesterday, shows that figure of people who will immediately get their kids vaccinated is 27%. And more than 3/4 of parents, and that includes people who say that they're going to get their kids vaccinated and say who want to wait and see or won't, are reporting that they're very or somewhat concerned about the long-term effects of the vaccine and not knowing enough data about that. So I think it's not unfair that we as a society maybe have a bit more trepidation about vaccinating kids.
Sure.
And that makes sense. But I think the rollout, because of that, I think the rollout might be a bit slower, even in states where there's high uptake among adults. And simultaneously, while, and this was discussed at VRPAC, that by no means are kids not at risk of COVID and even in some instances severe illness, they do have less rate of severe outcomes than adults. And that's something that parents are going to be considering as well.
Absolutely. And I guess that is also something that the FDA considered when it, evaluated the vaccinations or the vaccines. I'm curious about younger children, the youngest children. Are researchers looking at giving the vaccines to babies and toddlers?
To some degree, yes. I reached out to the 2 mRNA manufacturers today. I have some news on their plans. So for Pfizer, they have a clinical trial. They were enrolling kids 6 months to 4. And a spokesperson tells me that data on that subset could be available as soon as the end of the year, and they could potentially apply for emergency use authorization after that. A Moderna spokesperson said that the company plans to apply for emergency use authorization for children 6 months to 5 sometime in the first quarter of 2022. But both companies said they currently have no plans to have clinical trials for kids under 6 months.
All right. Well, Max Bayer, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.